really excited to be on this panel today to talk about maximizing the potential for Canada and the EV and the battery supply chain. And I wanted to kind of just present for a few minutes here about the state of play, what's happened over the last few years, and really set the stage for the conversation in terms of maximizing the opportunity. And really looking forward to the discussion with my fellow panelists. So the first thing I want to talk about is really why are we talking about batteries? Why are we talking about EVs? At a very high level, we all know that the growth that the industry is expected to see over the next decade and even longer as we kind of go towards net zero is exponential. But one thing that I would say that this future is not guaranteed, right? Like we're not going to be able to get to that level of EVs on the roads or batteries powering those EVs if we don't have resilient and innovative supply chains that are able to actually deliver on that promise or on that vision. So this is why we're talking about supply chains. This is why we're talking about Canada's role in contributing to that resilient supply chain, secure supply chains, to be able to actually unlock that vision of the future that we see in these charts that are projecting exponential growth. So as Nino mentioned, Canada's role in the battery supply chain has been growing over the last few years, and we've all heard the news about the Bloomberg New Energy Finance ranking. But as you can see here, so I've been tracking this for a few years, and the ranking has gone up. Well, we kind of went down a bit and then back up, and now we're number one. And it's really a testament for all the work that has been done. And I'm going to sort of briefly talk about those successes that we've had over the last few years here that actually, were kind of the contributing factors to seeing that growth over the last few years, or seeing the ranking improve. And the report is called Canada Dethrones China, which is a really consequential, I think, title in terms of the future and the potential. But again, as Nino mentioned, this is potential. This is where Canada could be in 5 to 10 years. And we'll talk about how do we maximize and how do we maximize that opportunity and make sure that that future is indeed possible. So first thing I want to talk about here is just in terms of some of the highlights. So we really have a firm foundation here that we've built over the last few years with investments growing over the ZEV supply chain and more specifically the battery supply chain. Shout out to Electric Autonomy. I used all their headings for my screenshots here, so just to make sure that we're on brand. But as you can see here, so I started working on this around 2017 in a different capacity, but I was sort of tracking the opportunity, and we didn't have cell manufacturing at scale or even planned cell manufacturing at scale. We just heard today from PowerCo right now about their plan in St. Thomas and the mega or the giga opportunity that's coming our way, and Northvolt, cathode manufacturing, processing. We've seen significant growth across the supply chain over the last few years, and that's the foundation that we have, not to mention just some of the legacy automakers that are modernizing their plants and adding EV assembly as part of their Canadian future. So really, this is the foundation that I feel is the tipping point or the inflection point that is going to switch the downward trend that we've seen over the last 20 years in the auto sector in Canada to an upward trend where we are actually gaining back some of the industrial capacity that we've had in terms of being number 5 in the world in automaking, for example, to gain that back and gain back the momentum there. So this is also, just wanted to show you an example. We actually have a map on Accelerate's website. You can go there and see sort of the growth of the sector. So this is another demonstration to see where we were in 2016, right, and where we were at the end of the year in 2023. So Nino mentioned we should give ourselves a round of applause for the success. I think this really deserves a round of applause because this is a testament of determination, of seeing the opportunity and working across industry, government, within the provinces as well, so not just federal government, and really making sure that we're unlocking that opportunity for what Bloomberg is projecting, Canada being the #1 country in the world in terms of contributing to the global battery supply chain. So the question here that we've been asking at Accelerate, and also we've been asking for the last few years, is really what is the size of the prize? And I'm really excited to get into that question in more detail with my fellow panelists. But really understanding like everything that we've done so far, the growth that I've just showed from 2016 till 2023, what does that actually make up in terms of the total size of the opportunity, right? So if we kind of see, we have a spectrum of maximizing the opportunity for Canada, where is our current state of play? Where is our growth currently at relatively? So are we only starting to scratch the surface of this opportunity? Have we, or are we starting to exhaust or saturate this opportunity? And this is really the question that I think we should be asking ourselves because, if we look at the Bloomberg ranking and we look at where we are today, for me, I see there's a huge gap there in terms of like all you have to do is look at China and see the actual capacity they have today. And if they're not #1 and we're #1, that means our potential is much, much, much greater than what we've done so far. And I think this is really why we're excited that everybody's here is interested in this topic, is working towards this topic, and I'm excited to talk to my fellow panelists about, as I mentioned, maximizing this opportunity for Canada. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for being here. So I'll start right away with maybe with Moe. We're talking today in this session and over the day's program about maximizing, and you just mentioned this, maximizing Canada's potential in the EV and battery sectors. And having just presented that snapshot of the current state of play of Canada EV and battery supply, and seeing the recent news on the Bloomberg Energy and Financing ranking, how do you explain this change in the ranking that we see for Canada?
Yeah, so I think basically looking at the Bloomberg ranking over the years, right, in terms of what are the categories they're talking about. So raw materials, right, so the idea there is that we have access to raw materials and we have also experience in that industry and extracting raw materials. So I think in that sense, nothing really changed in the ranking there. That wasn't the reason why we went to #1. The other categories are ESG. So there's a couple of things there. So China's ESG has gone down because obviously for reasons that we all know of. But Canada's ESG also gone up, right? So I think the idea there is in the weighting of the ESG is actually important. So what's interesting about the ranking for the Bloomberg side is they're actually weighting these different factors based on the market demand and based on the market conditions. So as ESG becomes more important, Canada's advantage in ESG becomes more important, right? So I think that's really the thing that kind of propelled Canada or helped propel Canada to #1. But the major thing is battery investments, right? So like the manufacturing side, like when we were #4 or #5, we had nothing. I mean, we had some things, but relatively it wasn't. And right now, with all the investments that have been announced, clusters and hubs forming, right? Like, as you know, in Quebec, in Bécancour, we're seeing clusters forming there as well. So I think that has been a significant contributor that put Canada on the map there. And lastly is what they call in the Bloomberg ranking infrastructure, innovation, and industry. And in that sense, it includes things like access to clean, cheap electricity, right? So that is something that Canada has an advantage of. And this is where something that the US doesn't have as big of an advantage on. Mm-hmm. So all of these factors have sort of stacked up to advance Canada to the #1 ranking. But again, I would want to emphasize that all of these things are potential, that we still needs to be unlocked, right? So the potential is there. We need to unlock that potential and this is what we're here to talk about. So
Definitely, very interesting. We also have public policies and regulations that probably, that definitely helps us as a country to go that way. The challenge will be to keep momentum, I think. We can discuss this definitely today. So picking up on this, Robert, how do you or does NGen gauge the ecosystem success as you support industry through funding and
no.
let's be patient. Oh,
Oh.
it's back. Okay. So yes, how would you describe the goal, and what do you think is still missing?
So I think, can you hear me okay?
Nope.
No.
Oh, wait, Rob. Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Really the goal for ecosystem success would be a truly pan-Canadian EV supply network that really is integrated with an overall strategy for the complete value chain. As we've heard this morning, there really is a great, fantastic opportunity right now to work with the OEMs, the GMs, the Fords, the Stellantises, the VWs, the Hondas, as well as the gigafactories that are setting up operations here, PowerCo, and so the opportunity is there to really, with the early days among us, like this is the time that we could and should really build that plan. And the plan would need to be a holistic one, something that moves Canada away from being this powerhouse of raw materials and maybe just doing little bits of the supply chain pieces here and there, towards something that's definitely more holistic to make Canada globally renowned as a value-adding supplier of EV solutions. Just to give a small example, like battery cells account for 2/3 of the cost of the battery. I mean, that's really, if Canada just continues to focus on the mining and the cell materials, that's going to exclude 50% of the total battery cost. Mm-hmm. So it's leaving things on the table like that. So right now, I think that the biggest opportunity is to really do that outreach, to really understand what the needs are, to really be strategic about setting up that supply chain. I'm excited to say that NGen right now is in the midst of doing that outreach right now. We're reaching out to the OEMs, really trying to get in touch with the stakeholders, because really as we apply funding and really try to build that supply chain, it has to be done in the right way. It can't just be a scattershot approach. And again, we've heard about, the Bloomberg report. I think everybody's heard that by now. It's going to be definitely a theme of the day, but it's telling us that Canada's on the right track. But I think what we can really say, there's still lots of work. I think that, the work needs to start now. I think that opportunity has to be sort of, embraced. And that's how we really get Canada towards, being this high, this country with great ecosystem success for the EV network.
Mm-hmm. So continuing to work in a coordinated, strategic manner.
Yes.
At Propulsion Québec, we've been talking about this for a couple of years now, of this necessity of having an industrial strategy. Some would say an industrial policy, with coordinated efforts coming from different stakeholders, definitely.
Exactly.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Robert. So maybe, Narayan, no doubt, and again, Moe talked about unlocking the potential. So many things need to happen to get to where we want to be from where we're now. But if you had to identify one priority, it could be acre and gap, an obstacle, or maybe an opportunity that we should be leveraging. What would it be? What should it be?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Automotive industry has been investing significantly in battery and battery supply chain development. And government is also providing supporting investment to this sector. I come from Windsor, and on my way to work, I see next star battery plant going up. Every day you see some changes, oh, that wall is up. So that's very exciting, right? But we need to make sure that we have that knowledgeable workforce, right? There's a gap in there. I come from a university, so I might be a little biased. That training and educating people So knowledgeable workforce is essential to the success of any new investment, and hence EV manufacturing in this case. So how, I mean, our government and industry is investing in facility development, but there should be a proportional investment in universities and in colleges so that we are able to build labs, furnish them with the right equipment, hire technicians, hire professors to teach, to train people. Then at the graduate level, industry and academia can collaborate to develop engineers and experts in those areas. So so I see that a lack, or we don't have enough of this specific know-how and the knowledgeable workforce that we need to support, to make this whole EV ecosystem sustainable. So to me, that would be the #1 gap.
The #1 gap. So investment in R&D, labs, training, focusing on talent and
Yes.
workforce. I'm curious to hear also Robert and Mo, if you want to follow up on this question. In Quebec, at least, we see one of the challenges is financing in some stages of growth. For example, at the very beginning, or then later on when a company wants to scale up. Do you think it's also a priority we should be focusing on, or another gap that we should be identifying or focusing on?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that one, Michelle. So, we definitely see one of the key obstacles to success, especially for the SMEs, is that scaling up to production levels. Back in 2021, NGen funded a number of EV-focused supply chain projects. And of those projects that we funded, over 80% of those were SMEs. And so when NGen funds projects, we're typically, you're funding highly, projects that are developing novel technologies, and so you have very innovative, very entrepreneurial businesses do a phenomenal job of putting together a great MVP or building a really solid pilot line. And of course, then the next step towards getting to commercial levels, production levels, requires, of course, more development, more investment, more dollars. And so, again, what we've seen is those companies that have had a great line of sight towards commercialization, where maybe they're working with an OEM or a large manufacturer, they have great commercialization success. They're able to scale up, they have the dollars, and they can get to that path very quickly. And it's not to say that those SMEs that don't have that line of sight aren't successful. It just, clearly, it takes them way longer. They have obstacles, of course, in terms of getting funding. There are gaps for sure there, and so now they're facing VC funding, but it definitely is a challenge. And so we also took a look at, we did a recent survey as well where we saw a lot of, again, SMEs. 84% of those respondents were also SMEs with fewer than 100 employees. And really, if we looked at those numbers, more than half, 56% of those identified commercialization support as the #1 obstacle to commercialization success. And so these companies are needing, funds to buy equipment, to scale up their processes, to even expand facilities or hire sales and marketing staff. It all requires dollars. And so when you get to that point, it becomes a real challenge. And so I don't want to just be the doom and gloom guy. I mean, it is definitely an obstacle, but we're seeing tremendous success. If we go back to those projects that we funded back in 2021, I'm happy to say that, those companies actually had remarkable success. They were able to generate over $270 million of new revenue within the first 1 to 2 years after the project's closed. That's like over an 8 times return on investment on our NGen funding. And also really remarkable is they generated 5 new spin-off companies. So what we're seeing is definitely an obstacle, but we're seeing Canadian companies being very resilient and really finding a way to solve the problem. But it's definitely a gap. I think that there's definitely an opportunity there to continue with that funding to help them scale.
Not doing it would mean losing momentum again.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mo, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So we're working on what we're calling a battery innovation roadmap currently with this project funded by NRCan, and part of that is looking at sort of what is the innovation that can come on batteries from Canadian firms, Canadian innovators, researchers. And one of the key things that we're finding out is that there's a problem with that missing middle, right? So we call it missing middle, valley of death. We hear about it all the time. The reason why we hear about it all the time because it's still a problem, and it will always be a problem, I think, because it's a symptom of things like risk tolerance, access to private versus public funds. So it's something that I don't think you can completely get rid of, but you can try to navigate and try to resolve, right? The problem is that I feel like we really need to focus on the battery side is that we actually have a number of homegrown Canadian companies that have the potential to be global leaders in this space in terms of supplying the materials, whether it's battery materials or whether they're doing recycling. And unfortunately, a number of those companies have gotten support from the US. They have not gotten support from Canada. So it's just really understanding what are we doing beyond the very big stuff. What are we doing beyond the very small stuff, right? Like, so we're good at funding a bunch of researchers which are doing fundamental research or low TRLs, which is great. And it seems that we, as I was showing, we're pretty good at, or we've been reasonably good at attracting large investments, right? Like in terms of billions of dollars of investments. Now, if we look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill in the U.S., which was focused on funding a number of projects in the battery supply chain, they were kind of doing two things that I've noticed. They're funding innovation, which means somebody's trying to figure out a technology, and they're funding segment gaps, right? So we don't have synthetic graphite, so we're gonna give $150 million for a $1 billion project to make sure that we're filling this gap in the supply chain on synthetic graphite. And it's not the scale that is gonna be, delivering to every single plant, but it's a scale that kind of gets them started on that segment so that they're filling those gaps. So they were using that infrastructure bill and that funding to address two things: actual innovation gaps and supply chain gaps. And I think this is really where we need to kind of be more strategic to understand some of the Canadian companies that we prop up, and we say, look at the companies that we have, and they're innovators, and they're recognized globally. And it's part of the reason why we have that ranking. If you look at that detail in the report, companies like Nano One and others are mentioned there as these are companies that have been innovating in this space and have potential to be leaders. So we just need to make sure that they have the support needed and we don't lose them to other countries.
It's interesting because we're talking more and more about this challenge also, and it's very similar to what you just said, of how we integrate the local players, the homegrown companies, and many times SMEs into that sometimes have been developed an expertise and know-how for years to this. How do we integrate them to this strategy, to these announcements, and make sure they benefit from it? And ultimately, as a country, we benefited as well. Because I feel like it's been done maybe more in an organic way.
Yep.
So should we be coordinating this effort? Right. It's another question. I wanted to go back, Narayan, to to something you said before, and I wanted to take a deeper dive on this point. Where is the need for more researchers and engineers most acute? So is the solution just money? Or do we have better ways for industry and academia to collaborate?
So what are the components that make an EV? The battery charger, the electric motor, the power electronics, the control of it, the software of it, right? So those are the ingredients we have in an EV. Very simple. So we see a lot of investment in battery and battery supply chain development, but we don't have, as a country, we have very limited this electric powertrain part, the battery and the rest of the system. So we don't have a mass of supply chain there. So we need to have that, but in order to support the development of that supply chain, again, I go back to that knowledgeable workforce, right? And that could be developed through collaboration, industry, academia collaboration. Even the government could participate as well. I worked with the government labs as well. So now this workforce development, right? Money, yes, money, we need money. If we have money, we can have lab infrastructure, we can have technicians, we can have teachers, we can train people. But everything has to be done in a meaningful way that our graduates can be employed, both at the undergraduate and graduate level could be employed by the industry partners. These days in Charge Lab, I mean, most of our graduate students, if not all, they get hired by the companies we collaborate with before they defend their thesis, most of them, right? So that's because we collaborate effectively, meaningfully with industry partners. We have office areas for our industry partners integrated within the lab. And they sit there on a daily basis. They work with our students. So they are preconditioning the students with respect to what they need, right? So that's why they become their potential employees. So the collaboration, not just, hey, here is some money, go do some research, write a few papers, and graduate. It is not that. It is working with industry collaboratively. So that's at the graduate level, master's, PhDs. We need to innovate, right? So we do that a lot, how to make electric motors lighter, more efficient, right? How to make batteries high power density battery, how to control temperature. So we are doing this innovation, but we are also producing all this highly qualified personnel that our industry needs. At the undergraduate level, it is not that simple. For example, we have Next Star battery plant. Now we would like to produce a good number of graduates who can work there, right? So then, this is a new area to us. So then we as a department sit down, develop a curriculum, then it has to have departmental council approval, faculty of engineering approval, university senate approval, and then that has to be approved by the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board as well. So that's a good 2 years. So say we started last year, we'll be offering the first semester would be, say, fall next year. 4 years from there, we'll have the first graduate. So even if we started last year, when the battery plant was announced, or a little earlier, 5 years from today, we will be graduating our students who can work there at the battery plant. So it's a time-consuming process, but if we collaborate with industry, they can help us develop curriculum so that the graduates, the companies will find our graduates right from day one, they could be a contributing member to the company.
And shouldn't we be focusing on parallel strategies? You mentioned that curriculum that can take 4 years.
Yes.
What we know now is that many companies need talent and workforce today, not in 4 years from now, because they do have to deliver, right? Should we also be focusing more on transferring skills from other sectors, different types of strategies to make sure that we have that workforce ready starting tomorrow or yesterday?
Yeah, we can develop programs to upskill or, I mean, for example, someone in engine thermal management, but with some sort of education could become an expert in electric motor thermal management or battery thermal management, right? Because there are some core courses that are common to all, right? And there would be some additional courses that they can take, and they can be a good contributing engineer or an expert in those areas. So we have, because they are short-term solutions, those are the short-term solutions. Because you heard, I mean, in Windsor, we had a lot of noise that Next Star is bringing a lot of engineers from South Korea, right? So, well, they need expert to get things going. And we don't have those experts here. So that's why it is very time sensitive that we do something about it so that we can occupy these plant is built through our taxpayers' money, we would like to see that our people are getting hired there, right? So that's why that infrastructure facilities are there, but to make the whole ecosystem sustainable, unless you have the people with the right background, the short-term solution would work in the short term, but in the long term, to be sustainable, to be a leader in this area, we need the right people.
We need both
Yeah.
strategies, short and long term,
Yeah.
or medium term. I'll jump to Robert now. How does the fact that much of the EV and battery value chain is an integrated US-Canada marketplace play in these issues? Does that really limit how much can be done or built in Canada?
So I think we all recognize, pardon me, that the EV supply chain in Canada is already very heavily integrated across North America. I think people are familiar with the 2022 Porsche consulting report. They noted that 97% of the revenue for Canadian suppliers is actually from the OEMs located across North America. And so it really is no secret. I mean, the US is a huge market. They represent the bulk of the EV market, and they create the pull for Canadian manufacturers. So I really don't see those facts as limiting what can be done or what can be built in Canada. I think the opportunity certainly is there right now to work with the key players and to really be, again, as we talked about before, being strategic about how we build our supply chain. And again, looking at these companies that are investing in Canada, like they are needing to build a supply chain with short logistics routes to really ensure their long-term success. So I really do think Canada's positioned well for success. You know, Mo touched on the fact that, you know, the Bloomberg report. And, you know, we already have an outstanding manufacturing sector with tremendous technologies being developed right across the country. We have a depth of talent. We have outstanding academic institutions across the country. We have really great resources and a clean grid. I mean, a clean power grid. So I do think we have lots of room for optimism. It is really the time to start doing the work now, that's for sure. But I don't see it limiting us if we can do it right.
Thank you. Maybe for the group, you just talked about this advantage that we all know of Canada's clean grid, but I should add, or I will add, the high environmental standards that are currently held out as reasons why companies are choosing Canada for EV battery critical mineral investments. Looking to the future, how much of a priority should we place on further enhancing those standards to keep that leverage? And where does this rank in terms of priorities?
Sure, I can take a first stab at that. I mean, first we got to ask ourselves, like, why are we doing all of this, right? So we're doing all of this because we want to get to net zero, because climate change, all of that, right? So it's sort of counterintuitive or counterproductive to actually say we want EVs that are cleaner without cleaning up the supply chain, right? So I think cleaning up the supply chain is not a luxury. It's not an option. It's a necessity. I do want to caveat that with it doesn't have to happen overnight, right? So the whole people like, oh, the battery's dirty, so therefore the whole thing is terrible. I think that's not really an argument because transitions don't happen like that. Transitions take time. You don't have to do everything all at once. You can sort of gradually build up infrastructure, market demand as you clean up the supply chain. So I think Canada can produce one of the cleanest batteries in the world, right? So I think that's one of the key things there. So I think as the world, and specifically OEMs, like OEMs have their own ESG targets, have their own sort of ESG pressures from investors, right? Their goal is to actually have the cleanest EV on the road eventually, right? So in the EU market, we're seeing the whole concept of a battery passport, where we're tracking where the materials is coming from, the carbon intensity, whether, you know, the all different ethical considerations. So I think as we kind of shift towards more, you know, widespread adoption of EVs, policies that are tailored to prop up EVs as an actual, you know, alternative for transportation that is able to deliver on the net zero promise, our ESG advantage will become more and more relevant. And again, as I mentioned in the Bloomberg report, the ESG weighting increased this year. So it was overall the ranking was like, okay, well ESG is 20%, maybe 10% or whatever number was. They said actually we think it's more important now because it's actually influencing decisions, right? And we're seeing that with our clean grid advantage. We're seeing that with our, as you mentioned, our general environmental standards here, rule of law, all of that.
So traceability, traceability, traceability.
Yes, yeah.
Robert, Narayana?
I think just to kind of jump on that a little bit, I completely agree. I think that, you know, the ESG piece is certainly very important. It's a distinguishing factor for us. Also just want to touch on, you know, one of the pieces that in Moe's study that he shared this morning, there's a nice piece in there from Dan Blundell from Nano One, and he really comments on, I thought he captured the point quite well. You know, Canada's not going to be able to compete with the Asian supply chain just by copying what they're doing and doing their similar methods. I mean, to be honest, right, China's had head start on production volumes. They've been doing it for a while, but China also has very lax regulations around environment. So the way that we're going to be successful is really to differentiate, right? We need to be strong with environmental stewardship. We need to be strong with our cost and efficiency improvements. We have to be focused on reducing energy usage. And then we really have to focus on eliminating that really devastating environmental impact. So I think that it has to remain a priority. I do think it's going to become, and it will stay a priority, but I couldn't agree more. I think it's a really key differentiator.
Added value for us.
Absolutely.
Narayan?
So, I mean, it's great that more than 3/4 our electricity is produced from non-polluting sources. And it's great that we have high environmental standard. So that's great. Sustainability, I mean, to me, the equation for sustainability should include economic sustainability, number one, right? That all components must be less expensive. Vehicle must be less expensive so that our general consumers can buy them. While the companies, for them, this whole process has to be economically profitable. So that's one has to happen. Number two is the national security part, right? That we have to have a localized supply chain. All the ingredients we need, we have, right? So if we want, we can build the whole EV supply chain. We can build from electric motor to power electronics, control software, battery, cells, module, pack. Those are the new things. So we can build the whole vehicle, right? So, so then we have a dependable, locally sourced supply chain, right? And third one in the equation is environmental sustainability, right? That from mining to processing to manufacturing of component and assembling EVs, the whole, I mean, all steps must be environmentally friendly. That's a huge challenge, but they have to be environmentally friendly. And with that, we have a nice, sustainable EV ecosystem. Okay, so then, say 10 years from today, we settle down. EVs are good, they are environmentally friendly, they are affordable, et cetera, but at that point, hey, what more we can do to be more sustainable? Maybe in electric motors, we use a lot of copper, right? How about we reduce the amount of copper we use, because copper mining is not as environmentally friendly. So maybe we can reduce copper and current, usually we call it skin effect, flows through the outer layer of the copper conductor. So maybe the middle part we can replace with aluminum. Aluminum is cheaper and lighter, right? So we are using less copper, right, which is good. How about eliminating copper, right, with carbon nanotube? Carbon nanotubes are made of carbon, right? So say I go to Alberta. We have a lot of carbon capture facility there. I capture carbon there, convert that carbon into carbon nanotubes, and use in electric motors. And if we can do that, electric motors would be twice as performing. Efficiency would be near 100%. Thermal management is so easy with carbon nanotube. Okay, we use a lot of rare earth-based permanent magnets in electric motors. How about not using that? How about using non-rare earth permanent magnets in electric machines? Well, power density gets smaller. So maybe we can work on the structure of the machine to improve the power density while not using rare earth permanent magnets. So there are many ways, right, that we can use. For example, we have woods, like trees. Then we can use char, the carbon, to build many parts of this electric powertrain components, right? So they are locally resourced, they are environmentally friendly, right? And they also can make this whole powertrain, and many parts of the batteries actually could be made using woods and this and that. So they are very futuristic. We apply for grants. Most of the time we don't get funded, that it is too futuristic. Yeah, that happened. I proposed that carbon nanotube paste machine a few years back. First year that, okay, you don't have enough industry partners to support the development of this, and that is true, right? Next time, it is too futuristic, we are not ready for this, right? So we are not ready for them, but maybe 10 years from today, we will be ready for them, right? So in that way, I mean, we should never be satisfied, right? Sustainability factor can keep improving.
So the lesson for anyone that is integrated in this value chain is not to take for granted their position in the chain and making sure they're always working into developing new innovations to reduce their emissions or carbon footprint. Interesting. We have time for one last question before going to the audience for a Q&A session or a few minutes. I would like you to, each of you, identify one positive example, ideally recent, that is helping to address the key priorities we talked about. So we talked about identifying gaps, recognizing the needs, financing, workforce, ESG standards. Do you have any, it could be a new policy, can be a particular company, investment, example, something very concrete.
I can start. I mean, I drive by our next sister battery plant. That's a beautiful site. And they are also helping and going to help develop curriculums and everything of their interest. So hopefully, so having the battery plant is a positive news, plus that will facilitate other growth, both in academia and support ecosystem.
I'm really excited to share that NGen continues to fund projects in the EV space. We have always focused our projects on 4 key pillars. Just, I don't know how many people know about what we do here at NGen, but our projects are always based on projects that are transformative. You know, they develop technological capabilities that, you know, offer Canadian companies a distinct competitive advantage. They're applied in terms of they develop later stage technologies with a great expectations for commercial and economic success. They're collaborative. They always involve 2 or more partners. And of course, they're enduring. They leave a legacy in skills development and test beds or IP. And so the great news really is that over the next 12 to 18 months, NGen will be investing significantly more into the EV supply chain. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, we are doing the outreach right now. We're trying to build and understand, you know, where we can have the biggest impact. It is exciting. At the moment, we're actually in the process of contracting some projects in the EV space. And so of those projects that we're contracting, they'll be launched within the next 1 or 2 months. 82% of the companies that we're contracting at the moment are SMEs. That's good news. And it's also good news that they're across Canada. So 40% of the companies are based in Ontario, 40% are based in Quebec, and 20% are based in BC. And also interesting to say that 40% of the projects involve partnerships that are interprovincial. So we're getting away from this, just work with the company down the street. We are thinking as a pan-Canadian kind of supply chain, which is great to see.
Good point.
So I am excited and looking forward to seeing what these companies and what these projects will bring, and I really do think they'll have a positive impact on the EV supply chain.
Interesting. Interprovincial, we don't talk about that enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and give one for each category, but do it rapid fire. On investments, I think it's great to see battery material investments, not just battery cells. So I think that's been, especially, I would say the cluster in Bécancour, that's a huge win. I think that is going to help us kind of fill out the gaps in the supply chain. On the finance side, I think the investment tax credits are a big help. Hopefully, we see them actually be implemented soon. I think fingers crossed that it's coming. On the innovation side, Electric Autonomy broke out a story a couple of days ago. I think it was like on Monday or Tuesday about battery research center at Dalhousie. So I think that's a great example of physical assets for battery innovation that can actually help scale up companies as well. And last thing, I think also just as we're here in Ontario and the integration with the auto sector, Project Aero by APMA is a great example of really a demonstration of Canadian capacity to deliver a fully built EV. So, and I think we're going to hear from Flavio at the end of the day. So I think those are 4 things in each category that I think are great signs of wins in the last few years that we should keep, building on that momentum.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for sharing your thoughts and ideas. I am now turning to the audience. I don't see much, but I don't know if there's a question for our panelists.
There's somebody there, but
there's somebody there. Yeah. So there are 2 microphones. One there. Oh, and you can. Oh, okay. Someone standing up, please.
I can start. I mean, all of the above. So,
all of the above.
So,
pick D.
I could not or did not touch on that recyclability part, right? So this is not a problem for today, but it is going to be a problem for tomorrow. So as we develop this supply chain, right? So innovation has to be there to see that when we make something, we keep the unmaking part in mind, right? That you build a battery pack using all sorts of ingredients, then at the end of its life, I mean, within EV, say 10, 12 years later, we can use in energy storage. After that, we need to recycle all components. That how to take all components, lithium, this and that out. So recyclability is going to be a big one because all these EVs with so much batteries, where are they going to go, right? And education part, of course, funding part, of course, those are, I will leave to our other panelists.
Thanks, Narayan. I agree. I think maybe I'd answer this question a little differently. I certainly have an opinion on where I think the gaps might be, but I know that what we're trying to do is really understand from the perspective of the OEMs and from the gigafactory operations that are coming, what do they see as the key gaps? Really, we want to make an informed decision on where we're going to be investing next. Certainly, they see it a little differently, and again, our outreach has really just started recently, so I'd love to get back to you with that one when we have done our full analysis, but I'd like to hear it from them. I mean, that's going to be critical if we want to try to solve their problem.
just very quickly, upstream investments. We got to start getting things actually out of the ground and stop talking about the potential. Because I think if we're going to be successful in 10 years, these permits needs to start rolling right now. Like we got to start actually developing these projects for extracting the raw materials that we have the advantage on.
Thank you for your question. I think there's another one there.
Hi. Is this on? Yeah, I
Yes.
guess you guys can hear me. Marilyn Spink. I'm with the Canadian Critical Minerals and Materials Alliance. And thank you. I appreciated your input and giving your time to be on the panel today and moderate. Given that minerals are actually not put in cars and components directly, right? When you're, and cars are actually much more than batteries. I think we focus on a lot of batteries, but there's so much more to cars. what I wanted to do was I wanted to just ask you, and I appreciated you touching on it, the midstream, like that's where I see a huge gap, is we've deindustrialized Canada for 30, 40, 50 years. And we don't actually make these materials. So where the mineral meet the chemical industry. And I kind of wanted, it's almost like we have to reindustrialize Canada to build this midstream because you don't put rocks in cars. And so I just was wondering, I'm hearing you touch on it, but it's almost like we don't, that industry does not exist in Canada, and China has had a 30-year head start. And so I kind of wanted to get the panel's thoughts on the midstream, the materials production, energy transition materials production that are needed for EVs, but are needed for our entire energy transition. And just as a thing, I call it a supply net, not a supply chain. I think Canada has a few links, but if we have a hole in a net, we can still catch fish. So I think I like the term supply net. It's like a supply network as well. And I see a huge hole in the midstream.
So just to quickly repeat, thank you for your question. For recording purposes, she would like to know about the midstream energy minerals that we need for the EV transition. Very summarized question.
I can,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned, we've seen investments in the last few years on the midstream side, like, nickel sulfate, other processing to get the precursors or pre-cam. I do agree that we need to do much more on the midstream side. But yeah, we're basically now, like, we're getting started on that. And specifically, as was mentioned, midstream, not just for battery materials, but also for materials that are going into the motors or other components. So I think it's extremely important. It is a gap as well, but it's kind of like, how do we can't fill all the gap all at once, so we have to kind of have a strategy, and this is what we've been pushing for: roadmap, strategy, targets, actually planning, industrial planning, which is one of the key outcomes that came out of our CEO report, which you can check out on Accelerate's website, which is a report that interviewed CEOs from across the industry, and that was one of the key messages that we've heard from them. It's industrial planning to make sure that we're addressing those gaps in a way that is strategic.
Thank you. Robert, Narayan, anything to add?
I mean, I don't have a lot to add. This is not my specific domain, but last year the Prime Minister was in the lab, so I was talking to him, and I was telling that I like all the attention being given to batteries, but there is more in an electric car outside of batteries. For example, e-motor side, that he said, I asked him that we don't build any permanent magnets, but if we continue to go in that route, so we'll need to import them from another country, which could be a serious security issue. Then he said, oh, well, yesterday I was in Saskatoon and we are developing this, trying to, I think, attempt being made to develop permanent magnets there. So I guess there's some activity, but I don't know how much of that.
Really, my point would just be that it's part of building that complete ecosystem. It just can't be focused on, again, the things that we currently do today. It really has to be a strategic plan where all pieces, right from the start of the chain to the end of the chain and everything in between. I think it certainly needs work that needs to be done, and it definitely needs to include that piece about the processing of those minerals as well.
Thank you for your question. I think there's I'm sorry. Yes, there's another one here. Please,
I'll go
gentlemen.
next, but there was another person there waiting longer.
Oh, okay.
Do you wanna
We'll
go?
go this one first and then this one, and I think that's all the time we'll have after.
Okay, thank you. Alex Tukal from University of Waterloo. I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Kerr for pointing that universities probably would not be able to react fast enough to the market needs for the talent. Like, we could not do that fast enough. I also wanted to raise a challenge about retaining the talent. University of Waterloo has world-leading researchers in battery materials. Our graduates go anywhere but not Canada. I see that firsthand. We need to retain what we already have. Okay, and a couple other notes. University of Waterloo is developing advanced battery lab opening next year and master's degree in electrochemistry to retrain chemical engineers. That's our reaction to the growth and the market need. But the challenge is there to retain talent we have today. It's not a question, it's just...
Yeah,
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you. So when it comes to talent, I mean, we train them for many years. We use a lot of our taxpayers' money to do that. And we live in Windsor, right? So other half, on one side it's Canada, another side is the US, right? And the river, Detroit River, is in the middle. So we lose a lot of talents to the US, right? Their market is big. I mean, a lot of my students, they are working on the US side, right? So we train them. I mean, globally, we look at the big picture that yes, it is helping this EV ecosystem, but if they were employed on the Canadian side, of course, I would be happier.
Sir?
Hi, my name's Jeremy James with 4D Robotics in Ottawa. Really, it's a question for Narayanan. And I like what you said about your aspirations to try and reduce the cost of materials. But at the same time, a side effect of that was you're reducing the power consumption, which could make the batteries smaller and reduce the cost. It could make the battery last longer. Ideally, you could get both. We're a software company. We're developing software to make vehicles autonomous. And what we're finding is that 5 years ago, what we thought we needed in terms of power consumption to make it autonomous was 750 watts. Now, as we're adding more algorithms to deal with things like perception, looking at objects and trying to understand objects, we're seeing the power consumption go up. And it could be as high as 1,500 watts for a small vehicle. And in fact, last week we were doing an experiment. We were trying to increase the frame rate from 5 seconds to 25 frames per second to 20 frames per second. And the CPU doing the work couldn't get enough current out of the DC-DC converter. So now we have to get a 1,000-watt DC-DC converter at 24 volts. So that's too much, and it's probably going to stress what's going on with EVs. So one thing to look at is we need potentially research in how to get the algorithms to consume less power, but even to get the processors designed so that they're requiring less power. So it's not really at the vehicle, the hardware, the electronics. In the electromechanical side of the vehicle, it's actually at the electronics and the software side. So how could you comment on that?
Can you just repeat the last part?
I was wondering if you could comment on
comment on
who's looking at the problem of the power consumption from the actual autonomy side of the vehicle.
I mean, through software, we can improve EV energy efficiency by a number of percentage points. So that's one way, and we have a lot of researchers at Waterloo doing that. I had the opportunity to work on a proposal with them that did not go through. But they're looking into that, right? So through development of software in an autonomous operating condition, in even bad weather condition, how the software can play a role in improving EV energy efficiency. On our side, we work mostly on EV powertrain side. Right after battery, we take over and look at everything. So that fundamentally, how we can change the architecture. I mean, traditional architecture is battery, DC-DC converter, then charger is there, then comes the inverter, then comes the electric motor. So we are looking into how fundamentally we can change that architecture so that we can throw away a few components to make things simpler, right? And in that way, we will consume, the powertrain will consume less energy, and the EV overall energy efficiency goes up, driving distance can increase, right? So everyone has some role to play, right? But on the software side, I think we have a lot of autonomous systems of experts in southwestern Ontario who are doing great work in that area.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we had. Oh, very quick question. Let's go.
Yes, very quick question. And if I can ask that to Mo in specific, I would love to hear your insights on that. I'm Elisa from AIM in Canada. And just a very quick background on my question. I was at the COP28 in the UAE a few weeks ago, and I had the chance to meet with a lot of companies there and a lot of North American companies that are actually making the move to not just the UAE, but to the Middle East in specific. And one of the points that they brought up to me is that the bureaucracy in Canada to get things moving fast enough. I would love to hear from your point of view when it comes to how slow the process is, and how can we is there something we can do to speed up the process and keep those companies developing things in Canada instead of looking for other countries for that? Thank you.
Thank you. So just repeat it quickly. How do we make sure we can go faster in terms of bureaucracy, I'm adding red tape, sorry, to make sure that we're attractive?
For sure. So as I mentioned before, rule of law is one of our strengths in terms of as a destination for these investments, for the supply chain. But we need to make sure that that is not stifling actual progress. And we know right now, especially on the upstream side of things, like when it comes to mining, that some mines are taking up to 12 years to actually go from conception to actual extraction. We don't have the luxury of time at this moment, so we really need to modernize our processes, permitting the bureaucracy if that is a problem. And what we've been pushing for is actually set targets. So know that what we need to do, we need to get this number of mines off the ground by X number of years. Therefore, a 12-year timeline doesn't work anymore. We need to change that to 3 or 4. Okay, then how do we do that? What are the actual provisions? What are the current processes? So when you start with where you want to go, you can then work backwards and then actually modernize the specific pieces. The good thing about this is that this is not a fundamental law of thermodynamics. Like, this is people and governance and bureaucracy, which is maybe more challenging to solve than thermodynamics, but it is solvable. There's no physical law that says we can't move faster, right? So.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we had. Thank you.